That's all good. Connecting back up here. So I just put this slide in today, and I was like, oh, we get to use that cool picture with the dichratum torquum, but the Pacific with drumming in the background. So I just think these trunks are so beautiful. And the dichratum here, you could lick your finger and rub it on that moss and find little fragments on your finger, right? So we're going to go into, we're still talking about the importance of moss, but now we're going to switch over, instead of talking about the ecological importance, the things that we as humans use mosses for or find them useful for. So human uses. This is a picture of peatland in Manitoba. I know that because it says Manitoba peatlands at the bottom there. But so you can see you have all these water pockets, right? Really flat landscape. Am I talking? Really flat landscape, so you have this water, and you can see in these areas where the moss is kind of growing in out onto the water, kind of forming mats growing towards the middle. And when those close in, then that fills in, and that creates more of a soil environment where the trees then can migrate out into that habitat. So it's actually converting, that moss is helping convert all that wetland habitat into more of an upland habitat. That's just the natural process, but they, for restoration purposes, they can use that process when there's some sort of mining or logging operation. They can seed, so to speak, or fragment an area with mosses and help that restore quicker up in kind of those northern areas. This system is also a huge carbon sink. All of that biomass just soaking up all of that carbon dioxide and making this amazing sink for our atmosphere and taking in all of that. And I think in these times that's pretty important. So we want to try and kind of limit the disturbance to these areas so that we can keep that carbon in the ground. So now we all kind of go to that thing that we think about, peat moss. Peat is where mosses have accumulated. So you have the sphagnum growing up on top. It still has its stems and its leaves, but underneath that you can have 8 feet of this gook, that's left over. That's all of that moss that's been grown up, and they mine that out of the ground, and it becomes our potting soil and the peat moss that we use commercially in horticulture. And they can also use sphagnum moss, but also, like you think of a forest with all the mosses on the west coast where it's just kind of draping. Right, they can collect that type of moss as well and use it as packing materials. So this is a picture of this seed company, the Southern Peony, that has packed their bare root peonies in some moss. So these are some important uses that have happened. In more northern climates, especially you think of Ireland, you get they make these bricks out of the peat sod, and they dry them out and they use them for fuel. They burn them in their fire pits and their furnaces. So that's a use. Back in World War I, they used these sanitary napkins as dressings for their wounds, because we talked about how absorbent sphagnum can be. So this, you can see, sphagnakins is what they were called. You see that there? Sphagnakins. Sphagnum moss products. So, that was Portland. I didn't read that. Portland, Oregon produced those. So we don't have those type of bandages anymore, but they have been important in history. Okay, so when you're on the web, you can find all sorts of things. So I found Survivorpedia, Uncommon Wisdom for Dangerous Times. So if you're a survivalist and you think that the world is going to end, you might want to go to this site. They had 9 different survival uses for mosses because they're so absorbent. The biology was really bad on the site. They were talking about how dense their roots were and stuff like that. So don't go there for biology, but it was really kind of humorous and a little bit informative. Survivorpedia.com. So I just thought I'd put that in there. So you've heard of probably lichens being used to monitor pollution, and you can do the same for mosses, like we talked about the mosses near Chernobyl that absorbed the radiation. They will also absorb different pollutants, so they can be used to monitor air quality in urban areas. So you can do this by monitoring species change, what sorts of species are growing in your urban areas, and if you lose the species that are intolerant of high nitrogen levels, then you know that you're polluted, right? They've taken like nylon, like I put baggies there, but it's really like nylon sacks, something that's breathable, or burlap, or something that is breathable. You can stuff mosses in there and set them out on the city and then analyze the contents after a while to see if you have pollutants. More recently, they in Portland, Oregon, they used this moss. I'm sorry it's so grainy. This is Orthoticum lyalii. It grows all over Portland, so they thought, let's do this one. So they went out and collected this moss and like in grid work all over the city and analyzed each different specimen for pollutants. And what it came back is they had 2 point sources of cadmium that were thousands of times the level of safe that these mosses have absorbed. And so they looked near these locations and there were 2 stained glass factories. So they were able to approach these factories and say, we need to reduce the cadmium output from your factories, and they've done that now. So all this thanks to mosses. Okay. So other research things that have gone on that I've been familiar with is that we talked about our tortula that sprang to life and got to dry out all the way, right? We watched that awesome video. So people that have tried to isolate the genes that allow for the desiccation, because if that is a gene and you can splice it in a tomato plant, then you have a tomato plant that's more drought tolerant. And wouldn't that be a good thing if you believe in that sort of thing? But these are the things that they've tried to research. They've also, when I was in school, there was one of my lab mates that was working with a company to try and use sphagnum as a diaper material, so that absorbent type of material to cut down on the artificial stuff. So through the news, the Bryophyte news links that I get, because, just this past November, there was this news link that came through that this liverwort, Radula parotidii, has a marijuana-like compound in it. And people have tried to smoke it, because, you hear, oh, marijuana. And it's pretty mild, like, they don't totally zone out. But they've analyzed these chemicals now more scientifically. And it seems to be better at reducing inflammation than marijuana. So it actually might be a better pharmaceutical in the long run at reducing without the other side effects. It depends what you want to guess. But all of this from a little liverwort. This is the picture. It's not a very beautiful specimen there. Okay, this is the one that I think is the coolest.